You are listening to Mining Stock Education, where you'll learn from the top leaders in the natural resource sector and uncover quality mining investment opportunities.
Thanks for tuning in to MSE. I'm your host, Bill Powers, and we're talking today with Dr. Rob Stevens. He is the author of the first book I would recommend for new mining investors. That's Mineral Exploration and Mining Essentials. I'll link to that in the show notes, and his website is MiningStockEducation.com as well. Dr. Rob, thank you for coming back onto the show. You're going to talk to us today about discerning exploration company press releases in regards to the maps that they put out to explain those interpretive results, or the maps that they should put out. So I'm going to kick it over to you now. Thanks for coming on the show again.
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. And welcome to all of your listeners or those seeing this on YouTube. Thanks for the opportunity to come and chat again. And as Bill said, today I'm going to talk about maps and sections in mineral exploration. A couple of things I would say just to get started on that is I encourage all investors to be looking at maps and sections connected with every news release. And hopefully the news release itself has links to maps and sections that can show you where that data is coming from, where the drill results are from. Or if not, to go to the website and to find those themselves. For me, if I just read a press release, I can't fully put those results into context unless I go and visually see where that is on the ground and where those results lie in regard to other results that have already been collected or to even the target that was, that they were looking at for that drill program. So not everybody is maybe as familiar with looking at maps and sections. It might be hard to sort of pull information out of that. So definitely I appreciate that. And it's one of those things, I think the more you look at it, the more you practice that, you'll become familiar with it to the point at which very quickly you can start to gain information from those images. So what I wanted to talk about today is sort of these four things. I want to talk about viewpoints in exploration, and by that I mean, what view are we seeing in a map or a section relative to the geology or the deposit, the mineral deposit that we may be targeting. So just to get a feel for that to start with, and that really leads into, these are the three main types of maps or sections we see. So maps, a surface map, looking down on it, cross sections and long sections. So we'll run through some of those. We'll look at some common images that you can see. So contour maps that we see, soil sampling, geophysics, those sort of things are often presented as contour maps. Three-dimensional images, which are great. So we'll talk about those for a little bit. Block models, which really now are when you get to resource and reserve estimates and you're creating block models. We'll look at an example there. And then we'll end up a little bit talking about geological models and some of the challenges and interpretations that come with geological models. And I've got a little sort of humorous few slides to end the presentation with. So that's what we'll look at in this presentation today. So what I really want to talk about here is that the world is three-dimensional. The Earth is three-dimensional. A mineral deposit is a three-dimensional body of rock. So to effectively represent that on maps or sections, there's three different views that we would need to be able to look at to fully see all aspects of the geology or a deposit that's being targeted. So in these models here, the red line that you sort of see is meant to be a vein. And so let's say this is a gold-bearing vein that's being targeted, and this gives you a sense of the different views that you would see. So the top left, the first one, the map view, that's probably one people are most common with. That's as if you're up in the air somewhere looking vertically straight down on the surface. So it's all the features that you would see on the surface of the Earth. And from a geological point of view, that shows you the strike of the vein in this case. So how that vein is trending or striking across the surface of the Earth. The next view, if I go over to the top right, is the cross-section view. So the cross-section view now is a vertical view. So it's like you're looking at a rock face. If it was a road cut or something like that, that would be kind of a cross-section view. So it's a vertical view that you're looking at, and it's perpendicular to the strike of the vein. So, if you're thinking of a vein is striking, straight ahead of you and behind you, then you would actually be looking at a cross-section view. And what you can see from that is the dip of the vein. So you can see how it is dipping down into the ground. Cross-section view is the most common view that's used to portray drill holes. Because typically we try to drill down and perpendicular right across the target, and that's best represented in a cross-section. And then in the bottom two images, we have the third view, just two variations on that, which is the long section view. And the long section view is in the face of the vein. It can be vertical, or it can be dipping and lie right on the vein itself, like the bottom right image. Or it's created as a vertical long section. That probably doesn't matter too much, when you're looking at it, whether it's a vertical one or a dipping one, but there are different ways of representing that. And what you see again is changes in the character of, in this case, the vein in the face of it. So those are the three different views that are needed to fully represent a three-dimensional body like a vein with two-dimensional maps, which is what these are. And towards the end, I'll talk about three-dimensional models. Of course, they're great because then we don't need to stick to a map view or cross-section view. We can see all of that at once. But, though you need a certain amount of data to create a proper three-dimensional view. So if you're early in your drill program, you're not likely to have that. So you're going to need one of these sort of views to represent your data. So just a few things, important parts about maps and sections is the location or an index map. So where is that section actually from? So you can, locate it on the ground or in context of other maps and sections that are being presented. Scale, this is always important. How big an area is covered and at what detail? It can be very difficult when you first look at a maps or a section or even a picture of rocks to know what is the size of the area that we're actually looking at. So scale is really important. It's good to know how big an area is being covered in that image. North direction or view direction for sections. So normally almost all maps are made with north being up, but it may not be that way. And likewise with a section, what direction are you viewing it? Are you viewing north, south, east, west? That's commonly information that's presented on that section. So you have a knowledge of which way you're viewing relative to the geology. And then, of course, a legend, so you understand what's actually being presented on those maps. All right, so the first one I want to look at here is the map view. And what we're looking at on the left in terms of the image, this is a surface map of a project in El Salvador from quite a number of years ago, but a common character for a surface map. So first, maybe I'll just talk about what are some of the common features that are presented on map view, and then I'll talk about this map a little bit more. So the topography, you may have contours on your map, hills, waterways, those sort of things. So features of the topography that are represented. Infrastructure, so roads, power lines, towns, other features like that. Mineral showings and deposits can be shown as they appear on the surface. And importantly, it gives you the strike direction of those features on the surface map. You can also have ones that will represent or show trenches, soil data, stream sediment samples, and probably most importantly, drill holes. So on the left here, what do we have shown on this map? First of all, I'll just point out down in the bottom, there's the scale. So we have a sense of how big we're looking at. So that's 200 meters along the length of the scale. So, this is a reasonably big area. We're looking at a couple or 3 kilometers, north, south, and east, west. And our north arrow here up at the top. So typically, almost all maps are with north facing up. We can see roads and tracks on this thing. We can see the veins. So the purpley pink lines here represent the veins. And what I like about this is you very quickly can go, okay, I can see more or less the veins are kind of striking north-south or maybe slightly northwest. And so it really gives me a sense of the character of the rocks and the mineralization here. And then we have the drill holes. And the sort of standard process or standard steps that people take to show drill holes is there's a circle, which would represent the location of the drill itself on the ground. And then there's a line coming out from that circle that represents the trace of the drill hole. So the reason I say the trace is because we're not drilling horizontally. We're drilling down at an angle into the ground. What that line represents is the horizontal trace of the drill hole on a surface map. So when you get to the end of this line, the way to think about that is somewhere vertically, directly down below you is where the drill hole ends. So it started at the circle, it went down, into the ground, and it ended at some vertical distance down in the ground immediately below where the line ends. So on this map, you can see a number of the drill holes have actually targeted the veins that you can see on the surface. But in other cases, we've got drill holes that don't seem to target anything on the surface. So why would they do that? There may have been some soil features or other things that suggested there could be mineralization there that they haven't yet identified on the surface. And so they're testing different features. So and we will look at in a moment both a cross-section, a long section for the same area taken from this little box that we have. But I'll come back to that and explain that in a moment so you know where the long section and cross-section are relative to this surface map. So this is another one. This is a number of years old as well. I like to use slightly older data, so I'm not picking on or highlighting anybody specifically from today. This is the Fruta del Norte deposit that's in Ecuador that was originally discovered by Aurelian, and I think it's a Lundin group now that has that and is operating it. So this is kind of a nice one. What I like about this is we have a nice grid here. So we have locations. We know where we are. We've got a scale bar in the north arrow down in the bottom left. So we get a sense of how big the area is. And we've got our drill holes. And what they've actually plotted on the drill holes are the histograms of gold. So it was the gold that they got and the different intervals along the drill hole cut at 10 grams per ton. So meaning that whenever they got a result that was greater than 10 grams per ton, they just cut it at 10. So you can see a number of them sort of hit a flat line. Like if I look at this drill hole here, a lot of them sort of reach a maximum amount, and that's the 10 grams per ton that they cut it at. And they would have done that a little bit for things like the nugget effect and to not skew the data to a few very high values. What I like about this, of course, is you can see the distribution of gold along the drill holes. And I always like to see that there is pretty good distribution along the drill hole. It's not some massive result from, 50 centimeter or 30 centimeter long intervals. So anyway, that's a nice way to present the maps as well. Maybe you could put a little bit of geology on here with an offset, with question marks, so they don't know exactly that there's a fault or some sort of geological feature that appears to have cut off the target vein. So I like this one. That's a nice way of presenting some data. Here's another map view. This is also from the same area where the Fruta del Norte deposit is. And these are stream sediment results. So again, a map view. In this case, of course, they highlighted the stream sediment or the stream locations in order to identify where the material was actually collected. And so each one of the black or colored dots is where they actually collected a stream sediment. Then they analyzed them, in this case for gold. They plotted up the gold results with different colors and sizes of circles. And I think this shows up really nicely. And, what I would do with this is obviously areas like in this sort of northwestern part, they didn't really find any results of any significance, so they would probably leave that, at least initially. But they would go to these areas where there were clusters of results, including where ultimately, because this was before the discovery, the Fruto del Norte deposit was discovered. So that really quickly kind of gives you a sense of their target areas by looking at a map like this. And this was early in the process. This was not long after they picked up the property and were, doing that initial work to try and focus where they should, continue to follow up on. So where are their likely targets? Geological maps, of course, are another key map view showing the different types of rocks or the deposits or veins that may have been discovered in that area. This is one from southwestern British Columbia, the Shovel Nose property of West Haven Gold. Again, a little bit of a few years ago for this one. But what I really wanted to highlight here is the scale again, is that you can get geological maps at all sorts of different scales. This is what I would refer to as a regional geological map. And here's our scale of 30 kilometers. That's pretty big. You're not exploring at those kinds of scales. The other maps we were looking at, it was a few hundred meters was the scale bar. So really what this is giving us a sense of here is only the regional geology of the area. And in this sort of brownie color is what's called the Spence's Bridge group, which is the prospective belt of rocks in the region. And the red areas are where they hold claim holding. So they're just highlighting here how they have a series of claim packages in this prospective belt of rocks. But the next one we're looking at is a more local geology map, and we're going to zero in on part of the Shovel Nose property down here. So here it is now. If we go down to the scale, we've got 3,000 meters, so still reasonably big. You would not normally have drill results on such a large scale map unless it was, a big property with lots and lots of drilling. But now we have much more detailed geology. And, this can be important at times. There are certain rock types or there's fault structures that may be the hosts to the mineralization. And we really have to zero in at this kind of scale or even more detailed to be able to fully understand that. And they've circled here in red some of their mineralized zones that would be targets for their drilling. Not shown on here, but as I said, you could have drilling, trenches, those kinds of things. Okay, so those are just a bunch of different examples of map views, keeping your eye on scale and those kind of features, and really what are they trying to present on that map. I want to come back to this one because now we're going to look at the cross-section and long section. So for me, if I'm looking at either a cross-section or a long section, I need some kind of reference to a surface map, to a map view, to know where that section is so that I can relate it on the ground. So what is drawn here in this little pull-out box is we've got a series of veins. And first here is the line of cross-section. So it basically is going east-west directly, across the map here. Cross-sections tend to be perpendicular to strike. Vertical views, perpendicular to strike. So the strike here is roughly north-south. So the cross-section is then east-west, because that allows us, and you'll see it in a sec, to see the dip of the veins. And then the long section is in the face of the veins or in the plane of the veins. So there is the line of long section. It is essentially allowing us to view the vein direct on. So here is the cross section now for the same area. If you want to think about it, these veins are striking into the image and sort of directly out of the image. What we can see here now in red is the dip of the veins and the width of the veins as it goes down based on their drill hole information. So this really gives us that subsurface information to complement the surface map, which gives us the strike information. They've drawn their drill holes on here, so you see where they are, where they went down, what they intersected. They've highlighted some of the key intersections and results from that. Now, a couple of points that I would mention here. How are they able to draw these veins? Because there is some interpretation. In most cases, I'll take the Manita 3 vein here on the far right. They only have 3 points of intersection, and yet they've drawn out this vein. Noting the scale here again, it's quite small now, 25 meters. So how did they draw the vein? Well, they had 3 drill holes, but they also had a point of intersection because there was some mining here before. So at the end of the underground workings, they know where the vein is. Then an important part, of course, that geologists do when they get a drill hole is they log or map the geology as they go down the drill hole. And by understanding that geology and then correlating the geology between one drill hole and the next, they are able to draw these kinds of extensions of veins beyond the intersections that they actually made. So it is, we don't see that here. All the geology, except for the veins, is given one color, green. But of course, there's a lot more detail in that geology that allows them to draw out these veins. Another question would be, well, how did they end the vein here or any one of these because there's some distance below the last drill hole? Well, they don't actually know that. That's sort of artistic and scientific extrapolation or extension of the vein. There is a kind of a rule of thumb that you could generally extend veins about half the distance between drill holes, and then you need to end it because you don't really know what happens beyond that. So you see people say, oh, open at depth or open along strike or whatever. Really, that just means they haven't hit the end of it, and they're going to have to drill again to be able to, deeper down to be able to see if it keeps going. So to me, this is an important one for drilling in particular is that cross-section view. And then here's the long section view. So I'm just going to flip back here for a second. There's the long section again. So we're looking directly onto the face of what's called the Manita vein. Now, what's being represented here, these are contours. And so what a contour is, a contour line is a line of equal value. But if we just take the yellow area, for example, everything in yellow has between 10 and 30 grade thickness in terms of the value. So everything within that yellow is between 10 and 30. It's not grams per ton. It seems like it, but it's grade thickness for that vein. What I like about contours is very easily you can see changes in grades, changes in whatever value it is that you're representing on the map. So we can see very clearly here the purple area, those are the highest grade thickness. And this actually shows us what we would call an ore shoot, which is quite common in veins. It's worth recognizing that in, say, a gold vein deposit, gold is not evenly distributed across that vein. There tends to be pockets or zones of higher grade areas, followed by zones with much lower grade. And they often occur in these sort of somewhat linear chutes, which you can see here as there's almost a plunge or a dip, you could say, within the vein itself where there's higher grade gold. And that may have been due to a fault or some reactive rocks or something that really resulted in the gold getting deposited out in the vein in that particular location. Now, the one comment I wanted to make here about grade and thickness, and this is fairly common that people will present, especially in long sections. The parameter that is being mapped is the grade, in this case, in grams per ton of gold, times the true thickness in meters. What's good about it is it combines both grade and size into one number. And so it takes those two important parameters and kind of puts them together. The downside for me is it combines two important parameters and puts them together. And I'll just say, I like to take this one as an example. So 90 GT, grade times thickness. So that could be 9 meters of 10 grams per ton. Well, that'd be pretty nice. That's a good thickness, 9 meters, 10 grams per ton. That would be great. Could be 1 meter of 90 grams per ton. I would say it's a nugget effect to me. Or it could be 90 meters of 1 gram per ton. Right? It could be any one of those. You don't know that because you're combining both grade and thickness together. I kind of like to see them separately, but I will say this is a common way of presenting it by putting those two numbers together. So this is not strictly grade. And I think that's, your first guess is to say, oh, this is the grade. Well, it's the grade and the thickness combined together. So that's where you got, if this was related to a news release, that's where you got to read the news release. What is the actual thickness of the interval and the grade? Because then you can relate that to this. And it's an underground mine, so it's relevant. 90 meters of 1 gram per ton, you're probably not going to be able to go underground on that. 10 meters of 9 grams per ton, sure, that would sound pretty good. So you're going to have to dig a little bit further to understand this and its economic potential. So one of the things with long sections, and this is another one from a few years ago, Escondida. It's a fair area here. So the upper long section, we've got 100 meters, and then there's sort of a key for that long section at the bottom here with a scale of 500 meters. So one of the things I think that's important to consider is what is new, what is old, and what is proposed. So there's a lot of information on this long section. Each one of the dots represents a drill hole, but most of those holes have already been drilled. And you can see in red, these are the location of new, what they call significant drill holes. And so in a way, yes, they're helping to understand the deposit and maybe expand it. I mean, there are important drill holes, but there's already a lot of information here. So the one comment I would say is if you see a news release that highlights a really great drill intersection, this is where the maps and the sections are so important because you need to go back and you say, okay, well, where is that drill hole in the context of all of the drilling that's already been done in that area? For example, if they released a hole right here, there may be some really great results, but in a way, we kind of already knew that. I don't want to belittle the result. It was good, but it's not like it was a brand new discovery or it was a big extension of the deposit. It's kind of another drill hole in amongst, a number of others that had reasonably good results. And so valuable as it is, this isn't the new discovery that you're, mortgaging the house to buy the stock. So just that's where the value of these maps and sections come in. You can put it into context of the other work that's being done and see that visually. Now, the other thing I would say for me, I'm going to come back to this. If this is all I've got, I'm struggling a little bit because a long section on its own is not enough information for me. I need to know where is this exactly and where is it in the context of the property and the other work that's being done. That sends me to a plan map. So this is the plan map here that gives me now a better sense of this whole project. Again, scale at the top, 1,000 meters. Clearly, we have a fairly well-defined vein structure here that's running sort of from northwest down to southeast. And they've got lots of drilling into this. And they've got the long section key here, so we can see where the long section, the different parts of the long section are. And the long section, again, would be looking right in the face of this fairly lengthy vein that they've discovered. So if I just go back to this one, this is the central and east area. So that's right in here. So again, really important to be able to look at both a plan map like this together with sections, whether they're long or cross sections, in order to be able to put the those maps into proper context. Contour maps, so I mentioned those already. Contour maps are very widely used. I would say particularly in geophysics, they're very heavily used because they're very effective at representing different data sources. You need a fair bit of data to have an effective contour map. If you only have a series of point data, you can't really effectively create a contour. And again, what a contour is it's a line of equal value, and everything within that contour has that value or higher. So a topographic contour is a classic one. If you were to get a topographic map and stand on a contour and walk along that contour, you'd stay at the same elevation. But then everything contained within that closed contour would be the hill above you. So here's one. This is from the Minto mine from quite a number of years ago, which is soil geochemistry, and it's copper. So they collected thousands of samples here, so they had enough samples to be able to contour it. And again, what it just shows you really nicely, the darker blue is kind of background. Then as you get into the hotter colors, these are the higher values that you're getting of copper in the soil, and it's copper in parts per million. Very nice way of being able to illustrate where your higher features are and where your anomalies are. In this case, soil geochemistry worked great because over the original Minto mine, you had an anomaly. You got this big red one down below it. That was discovered as an additional deposit, which has actually now been mined out. So in a way, you can almost guess where the new pits are going to be from this soil map. The soil sampling worked really well here. On the right, this is a magnetic map. Again, the contours, the hotter colors represent high magnetic values, and the cool colors, low magnetic values. Maybe just the one comment I'll make here is these sort of linear, and lines have been drawn down them, these linear magnetic lows are thought to represent fault zones. Because one thing that can happen in fault zones is you get hydrothermal fluids moving along them. Those hydrothermal fluids have sulfur in them, and they convert magnetite, which is the main mineral that creates these magnetic anomalies. It converts magnetite to pyrite. So the faults show up as mag lows because the magnetite has been broken down and converted to pyrite. And at the same time, they can be good hosts to a number of deposit types, such as gold. So trying to identify faults is an important step in many exploration projects. And a contour geophysics map like this can be very helpful in trying to identify something that would be harder to see in a geology map because you wouldn't have that sort of complete coverage like you do with a magnetic map of this nature. So magnetic or contour maps are really great for identifying trends and seeing the variations across a map area. All right, excuse me, three-dimensional views. This is ideal, and the software that we have today has become really impressive at allowing us to create very effective 3D models of various mineral deposits. One of the things I mentioned at the beginning, though, is that you need a lot of data to create a good 3D model without it just being a schematic. So if somebody shows you a really fancy, great 3D model of their deposit, and they only have 5 drill holes, be skeptical of that, because that's more of a cartoon and something that they've created rather than based on actual data. This one on the left here, this is a large porphyry body missing a scale. So it has a bit of a shortcoming that way. But the scale at the bottom, each of these ticks here represents 100 meters. So there is a scale that's sort of built into this model. All of these kind of lines that you can see cutting across this model are drill holes. So the model itself was built on probably hundreds of drill holes into this deposit before they could create that. So I feel this is a good model representing the copper, in this case, in the deposit. But you need a lot of drilling to get there. Here's another one. This is actually for the same area in El Salvador that we looked at the map view cross-section and long section. So now we have a nice 3D model. This image, we're actually underground looking upward. So the top of this image is actually underground, or the surface, I mean, but seen from underground. So, of course, this is really nice. Each one of these little sort of tablets represents a vein. We can see the underground workings on it, that sort of thing. So, if you can create a nice 3D model, obviously it's the way to go. And I got a little bit of a video to look at. This is another one from the Yukon that I'll just narrate here for a moment. That a lot of companies, if you go to their websites, you can use this company called Verify that's been doing a lot of this work, creating really nice 3D models, and you can get on there and spin things around and really look at it yourself. So this is in the Yukon, the White Gold area, talking about a series of different targets that they're going to go after. Here's the actual deposits now on the surface, so you can see it's sort of a map view and cross-section underground view at the same time. So this is where they actually have resources. So we can see that there's enough drilling there to create this three-dimensional model. Here we are, we can sort of fly underground, see the veins as they're actually oriented and get a sense of their size and their shape. There's all the drill holes. Always nice to see those drill holes so that, in this case, I would say these models are quite well constrained because they have a lot of data that goes into them. And then, of course, they talk about extension areas that haven't been fully tested, that kind of thing. So I really encourage, to go to websites, especially where there has been a lot of drilling on a project, and look for these 3D models, especially ones that you can spin around yourself. They're kind of fun to do, if nothing else. So, and then block models. So this is really now getting beyond exploration into resource estimates or reserve estimates. And typically, a resource or reserve estimate is done by developing a block model. In my sort of easy thinking about it, I liken it to a Lego model. So this is a series of Lego pieces that are put together, and each one of the different colored Lego pieces has a different grade associated with that. And the grades of each of those blocks was determined by the drilling, which we don't see on this model. And then the overall grade and tonnage for the deposit is developed by adding the tonnage of all the individual blocks together. And then you have to do a weighting of that for the grade in each block to get the overall grade for the deposit. So this is typically how the engineers or the geologists are putting together their models of the deposit to arrive at their grade and tonnage, is subdividing it into individual blocks, getting the grade and tonnage of those blocks, and then putting them all together. And then sometimes you can see them together, or you can get a cross section of the block model that now is not a 3D model. This is the Mount Milligan mine, which is in northern BC. This was models before it went into operation. It's now been operating for quite a number of years. So here's the line of section. So what's nice about that is this is their proposed pit. There's the line of cross-section, so I know exactly where the cross-section is. On the right now is the cross-section associated with that. So here's the pit outline, the proposed pit outline. And then what we can see on here, each of these little colored squares represents the end of the block. So, those blocks have a three-dimensional, like Lego character to them. So, but in a cross-section, all we're seeing is just the end of those individual blocks. But, we can nicely see here different grade distribution. The redder colored blocks are the higher grade material. We can see where there's obviously very low grade material, which would be waste rock, would have to be removed in order to extract the mineralized blocks. So you can combine cross sections and block models together in this way. Of course, they're much easier to see when it's like this, visually a lot clearer, but this is a schematic model. This is you're not going to be doing calculations from that per se, whereas with this, you could. So the last thing I want to end with here, and then I've got a couple of sort of just funny slides to end with to emphasize this point, are geological models. So what I would say is just watch out for generous interpretations of mineralized zones in things like cross-sections. Some of you may have seen this image before. It's one that's been presented a number of times in different places, saying, okay, we've got these 4 drill holes with some intersections in them. And the top one is what the interpreted geological model is. So continuous veins, that the veins extend between the different drill holes. They have some reasonable width to them. So from a mining point of view or from a tonnage point of view, that looks quite attractive. The bottom is the reality of what the geology really looks like. And both of those geological models are, quote, permissive within the drill hole intersections. How would you be able to distinguish between those two, like a geologist in reality? Well, more data and a better understanding of the overall geology. But very early in a project, you might not have all that information, and it's possible you might come up with this interpretation. So I think you just want to be, especially when there's only a little bit of data, treat some of these models and interpretation with a little bit of caution or skepticism until there's enough drilling to fully sort of understand the model of the for the geology. And it is difficult. I mean, you can have folded rocks, faulted rocks, veins that get thicker and pinch out. So there is a lot of complications to geology. And even the best geologist may struggle to come up with the best model on that. So the main thing here is just watch out again for generous interpretations when there's not a lot of data. Treat those with a bit of skepticism, I would say. And so to emphasize that with a couple of sort of funny ones to end with, this is something a friend of mine sent me many, many years ago, and I just remembered it when I was putting this presentation together. So it's the same idea as the last one. Let's consider a set of drill intersections. So just 4, they made them vertical drill holes here, with, of course, the yellow being the mineralized intersections. And so here is the very conservative geologist's interpretation. They're not correlating anything between one drill hole and the next. I think I mentioned before, sometimes you can extend things about halfway to the next drill hole. That's a bit of a rule of thumb. So that's as far as they've gone on any of these. Doesn't look geologically entirely plausible, but at least they're not pushing the point too much. Here's the next one. This is a conservative geologist interpretation, willing to go a little bit farther and connect things together. This is now the optimistic geologist interpretation, definitely correlating the zones together to create a more impressive looking deposit. This is the extremely optimistic geologist's interpretation, more and more deposit occurring and less waste rock. This is the geophysicist's interpretation that was based on asking the extremely optimistic geology, where do you want your deposit to be? Beat unfair to geophysicists, but so this is their interpretation. Here's another unfair one. The mining engineers' interpretation, they like to be very exacting with things. And so funny what you can create with the same set of drill holes. And then finally, we have the Vancouver promoters' interpretation. And, this must have been done by an Australian, I guess, but placing the deposit here, across much of Western Australia where there's great gold deposits. It's elephant country, very blue sky, and even the fairy godmother is the VP exploration. So anyway, just a set of funny ones to end off with. Like everything in exploration, knowledge builds gradually. Always good to have a bit of skepticism about what's being presented and doing as much as you can to try and, verify the interpretations that are made. So there we are. Bill, you mentioned my book at the beginning, available on Amazon for anybody who's interested. I also have some online training courses that cover some of the similar material to this that you can find a link to it from my website, MiningEssentials.com. So if anybody's interested in that, please feel free to go there. So there we are. Thanks, Bill.
And Dr. Rob, I have a couple questions before you go. Great presentation. Sure. This is the exact content that I would have wanted when I started out, which is one of the reasons I ended up buying your book. So with that last humorous building example that you gave, you want the geologist that put together the resource estimate to be very conservative, don't you? Because the engineers are going to have the wrong information when they plan out the mine, whether it's an open pit or underground, they'll have the incorrect information if the resource estimating geologist doesn't get it right. And my understanding is that's what went wrong with the Rubicon deposit in Canada before Battle North came in, looked at it again, and made it economic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say you want somebody between the conservative and optimistic geologist. And the reason I say that is that you have to go as a geologist when you're doing these. You have to use the best geological information that you have and extend zones where you don't have information. But you need to use good geological information. So this is where detailed mapping, logging of the core would come in. Understanding the geological framework, the continuity, for example, on the surface from mapping. How continuous are veins? You should try to get as much information on the surface as you can. The trouble with being too conservative is that there's always a lack of information in exploration. I mean, that's a given. Even if you have a lot of drill holes, you're still only looking at very small diameter holes into a big area. They could be separated hundreds of meters apart. So you need somebody who's going to extrapolate and extend between zones, but using good geological principles and as much knowledge as you have. So I think you want to find a balance there. If you have a geologist that's so conservative that they are never going to extend it from one hole to the next until another hole is drilled in between, well, you might actually get an underestimate then. You might not be doing justice to what the opportunity is. But you don't want the other end as well. So to me, it's about having the right geological knowledge and for that experienced person to use as much of that knowledge as they can in developing that deposit. But it has resulted in a number of challenges before where mines have started and haven't produced what they thought because they just did not have the model correct, even with lots of drilling. And I think what can happen too is people develop a model at some point and then they just keep attempting to reconfirm that model as drilling continues without necessarily stepping back and maybe starting again with a fresh thought, which is what can happen now when, of course, a new company comes in and looks at it. But they have the benefit of knowing that the existing model is wrong. So,
Rob, what do you think? This is something I've been thinking through as I or speculate in these smaller exploration stories or even development stories that want to grow. With a geologist that is like a promoter, because with the advent of YouTube, there are geologists that are functionally promoters for exploration stories, or there could be a geologist that has more of a optimistic promoter bent. So when he or she communicates that to the lead executive, who's the face of the company, talking to investors on podcasts or in one-on-one meetings, perhaps the promoter could be making more exaggerated statements, not because they're trying to deceive anybody, but because of the optimistic promoter geologist is feeding them that perspective. I mean, based on your experience, are there any insights you can share here for investors?
Yeah, I mean, it's very true that, and of course, you can get the extremely optimistic geologist who's a promoter at the same time. To me, I think from an investor is be skeptical at all times. And when you've got an early project without a lot of data, there are many possibilities of what could happen from nothing to a discovery of a big mine. And so if it's over promoted, it always makes me cautious. And so that's something that I think I would say if there's half a dozen drill holes and somebody's already talking up, this is the next biggest gold mine ever found, then I would be very skeptical of that and the information that they release, because it would strike me that they're far too promotional. Once you get more information, there's more drilling and there's better geology. I think that it's harder to be over promotional in a sense, because there's data that speaks for itself. But yeah, that's a hard one. You have to rely on the company people to give you the right story based on the technical data that they've been poring over and building these models from. So to me, promotion is one of these. It's necessary to promote your company and to get people to know about it and to get the investment necessary to do the work. But over promotion's the trouble, and that's where I would be very skeptical about it, particularly if there's not a lot of information on the project at the point of that over promotion.
Okay, so continuing along my questioning to you regarding how CEOs present their exploration results, what happens when an exploration company says, I'm doing this 15-hole program, but releases 8 out of 15 holes, or kind of forgets that they even said they were going to do a 15-hole program? Like, can you explain how you would interpret that from the investor standpoint and also from like a regulatory standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a red flag if they say they're doing 15 holes and in the next 6 months they only ever release 8. You never see the other holes. There should be full disclosure, and I think that that's expected from a regulatory point of view. Of course, you would want to highlight holes that you did receive some intersections in, but you need to disclose all of that information. So we drilled 15 holes. Only 8 of them resulted in intersections. The other 7, there was no significant intersections. So then you're going to have maybe a table that only highlights those areas of intersections. But I would want to see on their maps and their cross sections and that sort of thing, the specific where all those holes are, so we know what did not generate any results and what did generate results. So there should be complete disclosure. But of course, I'm not going to put much emphasis into those holes that didn't generate anything because they weren't of interest. But from an investor point of view, it's important to know where there were good intersections and where there weren't. Because if the good intersections were all just in this one small area and they were targeting, a relatively large zone, that's important to know. And so by showing all of the drill holes, you can get a sense of that, see that on the maps or the sections that they're presenting. So
as a rule of thumb, if an exploration company puts out a press release with drill holes, but they give you no context, they give you no maps, the holes aren't fully linked to pertinent historical data, obviously that's a red flag. So is that an avoid for you, and do you attribute malice or incompetence? How would you?
Well, they maybe need to hire a really good communications person. I wouldn't want to say necessarily as far as incompetence. They're not doing a very good job of presenting their data. They should. They're not going to get very many investors, I think, if people can't figure out what it is that they're doing. I will say I have seen, especially small juniors that are running a little bit, they have very little cash, and it's the geologist who's the CEO, who's the qualified person, who's logging the core, and is not necessarily great at communicating effectively and thinking about what it is that an investor needs to see and hear when they put out their data. So, but is that a red flag unto itself? Maybe. Exploration, discovery, mining, it takes a team of people, not just a bunch of geologists. So, and they're probably not going to get many investors if they can't tell their story. So, so red flag on its own, just because they're probably not going to get the investment they need to continue much further work.
Do you think that in a press release, should it be regulated that if a company is twinning a hole that's drilling next to a previous historic drill hole, and they could be doing that to put out good results, to raise money or get a flashy headline, should it always be disclosed in the press release, mandated, that this is a twinned hole in close proximity to another historic hole?
I'm going to say I haven't sort of followed the regulatory requirements tight enough to see if that would be a big shift, let's say, in what's required disclosure. it would be good practice to do that without a doubt. It would be misleading if you included a map or a cross section that omitted the previous drilling. Yeah, I mean, it would be misleading. It comes back to this full disclosure. You should be disclosing all of that information, even if you didn't drill those holes. It's fair enough. I mean, just I think for the listener's point of view, particularly if you're dealing with historical drill holes that are unclear whether you can rely on the data. People will twin some of the historical drill holes to compare sort of modern results to the older results to see whether, that earlier drilling and the results that they obtained are reliable, and then they could use that historical drilling in their models and that sort of thing. So it's a reasonable thing to do. But I've seen companies that say, oh yeah, we're going to do that, but of course we're only going to twin the 3 best holes from the historical data so that we get the best data hopefully possible with our twinned holes, which will look great and get us investment. So is that misleading? Maybe it is a little bit. It would have been better that they disclose the historic holes along with the twinned holes. And I think most do, but not always. So to the question if it should be required, I don't know. I'm gonna hold off on that one. I'm not sure I have enough sort of sense of current regulatory frameworks for disclosure to say whether that should be required or not.
Well, thank you for that answer and for this presentation, Dr. Rob.
Yeah.
So if you like what you heard today and you're interested in junior mining stocks, it's a high risk, high reward sector. You can make a lot of money. You can also lose a lot of money and lose a lot of money quickly. Most do lose money, but one of the ways you separate yourselves and take advantage of the lower level of competition is by studying materials such as what Dr. Rob puts out. You can find more at MiningEssentials.com. I have no business relationship with Dr. Rob, so if you buy anything there, a course or a book, there's no financial interest from me, but I do find that his resources are some of the best and easiest to understand for non-geologically trained investors in this sector, so go check that out. And Dr. Rob, again, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll have you back on in about 3 or 4 months to talk about a different topic.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thanks very much, Bill. Always enjoy it. So take care.